The Dread Elves, and this is an army that I have been playing for years and years now. Well, obviously before it was used to be Warhammer Fantasy Battles, and now it's 9th Age, so it's a bit of a different beast. But this is the faction that I started out with when I started Warhammer back in 6th edition. And back at the time, the Dread Elves were not, or the Dark Elves back then, were not really supplied with a very strong army book, and that all changed later when the 7th edition army book came out for the Dread Elves, and you had combinations with Witch Elves with strength 10 and stuff. And but anyway, when I started out, it was difficult to get an army on the table that could reproducibly perform well on the table, because it's a very, very sensitive army with respect to ranged output. And yeah, if you're fielding just a normal balanced army, with Red Elves you would always face that, well, your opponent can prioritize on your units that you need to protect, and if he manages to, then yeah, the hitting power of your units is going to be drained, and then your army will not perform that well anymore. And yeah, in 9th Age I think they went, they took a good middle ground between the 7th edition Dark Elves, the 6th edition Dark Elves, and yeah, basically that. But yeah, I'm still allured by my 6th edition army, where I used to field just a couple of units of Dark Riders, just a couple of Hydras, and some hard-hitting characters on Pegasi. And yeah, this is the 9th Age incarnation of this army list, basically. So back in the 6th edition, obviously, you didn't have any Dark Acolytes. They only came later, but I think they're a nice addition to the army list. And the Hunting Chariot is also a new piece to me, but I think it's a very important piece in the list with the high amount of single model threats that are currently present in the game. So I'll just run you through the entire army list. So you can see the entire army list here on the right. It features an Oracle, that's the general. She's Wizard Master on Witchcraft. Yeah, I'll just go into every choice a bit more in detail in a minute. And Captain with BSB, Beastmaster, and paired weapons here is Heart. 4 units of 5 Dark Riders with repeater crossbows, 2x10 units of 2x10 repeater auxiliaries, 2x5 Dark Acolytes, once with a champion with Cult of Yema, and then 2 Hunting Chariots and 3 Hydras. So as you can see, it's a pretty standard army list on paper. But yeah, on the table it's a bit more different. So I'll also attach to the end of this video a kind of setup and first turn scheme for this army, just to clarify a bit more. But we'll first just go through the list one by one. So for characters we have a Captain, Beastmaster, and an Oracle General. I used to have the Dread Prince in the list, also on a horse with the Midnight Cloak and a lance. But yeah, it's really a glass cannon. So yeah, you are very well protected against range damage, even though, well, you can obviously miss your 3+ ward save, and that happens more often than you would want to. But once you go into combat and you're there for a round, then after this first round you don't do anything anymore, and it's very sensitive to bad rolls where you generally you miss one to hit roll. You might still want to go for something that has a higher toughness than toughness 5 or 6, and then yeah, with your multiple wounds. In the end, I ended up doing like 2 or 4 wounds to a monster and then get beaten down with this Dread Prince. So instead I swapped it over for an Oracle Wizard Master. With an Elven horse with Essence of Mithril and Moriak's Reaping, she still puts out 4 attacks at strength 4 with Death Trance and AP 3, and every wound that she does, she gets a Veil Token. So yeah, in combat she's quite capable of cleaning up or aiding the other unit, and it's really a support character combat wise, and yeah, the output is not too bad. Yeah, with regards to magic, she's a wizard master on witchcraft, and I think this is very important for the army, or at least it helps the army immensely, because witchcraft has two spells that can tune down the shooting of your opponent. The one where you just I don't remember the names right now, but the one where you cast it and the opponent is not allowed to shoot with this unit, and also obviously the random movement one where, well, if you've moved, then with random movement I believe you're shaken afterwards, so you can't shoot, or at least it works on war machines, which is yeah, mostly the target for a random movement spell. Yeah. So, and otherwise you have the Raven's Wing shenanigans, extra movement, less movement. It's a good pick in the army list. The only thing I wouldn't necessarily pick is the hereditary spell for Dread Elves, but I think it's a very bad hereditary spell. Because, yeah, reroll to wound, you already have the reroll once to wound, and reroll to wound on your shooting. Yeah, it's nice, but it's a 12 plus to cast or something. It's incredibly high, and yeah, you can only target one unit with this, and it requires for your entire army basically to be able to shoot at this one unit and negate all of the other threats in the army. So I don't like that spell. Yeah. So then we go to the captain. He's a BSB. I think it's much needed in the army because he'll be fleeing a lot. So I did like the leadership 10 of the Dread Prince from time to time. But yeah, I think just having a BSB is also sufficient. He's a Beastmaster, and yeah, that's actually a change that I put through quite recently. But it gives the Hydras, one of the Hydras, you can give him hatred, and otherwise you get minimized leadership rolls for Hydras within 12 inches of him. So yeah, these Hydras are not gonna shift unless I want them to. Yeah, and my opponents are sometimes amazed by this, but from time to time I also use the Hydras as chaffing pieces, whilst they actually bring the real punch in the list. He has paired weapons with Hero's Heart, and also the Basalt Infusion. I think it's also important on this character because my opponents, I quite often found that they would have these alchemy snipe spells from time to time, or bolt throwers with flaming, and yeah, in the list you can still shoot at Hydras and they're also scared of this stuff, but this BSB is just so sensitive to any AP10 multiple wound stuff. And then there's the question of going for Hero's Heart or for Lance, with some enchantment possibly. I think the paired weapons Hero's Heart is just straight out better because you go to 5 attacks with strength 5 at all times, so it does mean that you can also just park him in front of some enemy unit and let the other person get the charge, and you still have your 5 strength 5 attack stats. Probably are gonna hit on 2s, and that might also just wound on 2s with the reroll of the 1s with AP3. So yeah, that's total carnage. These elven characters, they can really strike hard sometimes. Yeah, so then we go to the core section. First off, we have the 4 units of 5 Dark Raiders, and yeah, these guys are amazing. Even more so now with the +1 to hit on short range, which they got through 9th age. Yeah, you wouldn't say so, but this is these units, they shoot harder than the repeater auxiliaries. Because, well, there are 5 models, but they're always on short range, so that's 10 shots hitting you on 4s. And the repeater auxiliaries, they fire 20 shots Normally, if they can shoot at something that's within range and they don't have to move, it's at 5s, but often you end up having to move it a little bit, or because the importance of the shots of the repeater auxiliaries is not that big usually, that you definitely want to adjust your battle plans to keeping them in place. So I end up shifting around with them a lot. So the Dark Raiders actually shoot harder than the repeater auxiliaries, and yeah, they on their own they're quite capable of removing the opponent's chaff from the game, and that's their main focus, just to clear the field in the first couple of turns. And yeah, they're quite adept at it. Yeah, if you compare them to Wolf Riders, Wolf Riders are gonna suffer a lot. Because whereas Wolf Riders might shoot off just one of you guys each turn, the return fire is going to kill about 3 Wolf Riders, 2.5 to 3 Wolf Riders a turn. So if you combine 2 units, then you just shoot off an entire unit of Wolf Riders. And that's besides their possibility of still setting up a charge, because they still charge in with lightning reflexes, weapon skill 4, and spear at strength 4. So yeah, it's obviously they're chaff, but they are good chaff at that. If someone has an eagle, you can quite confidently charge the eagle and expect to win the matchup. Yeah, so besides these 4 units, we have 2 units of repeater auxiliaries. As I already mentioned, they are mostly just for scoring, basically. Well, I'm not adjusting my battle plans to them. That was what I was saying. They're in the list for the scoring, and I think I should switch them actually out for 2 units of 15 Dread Spears, because yeah, the shooting that they offer is from time to time it's amazing, but just having the 5 extra bodies per unit, I think it's better. And also spears on Elven infantry with a reroll of 1 to wound. Yeah, obviously if you compare the high elf counterpart against the dark elf counterpart, the high elf counterpart is better with the fight an extra rank for just a couple of points more. But the dark elves, well, the dread elves, they're basically better individually, so that's why they have the reroll 1 to wound compared to the high elf equivalent. Yeah, so these guys, yeah, I just have to swap them out probably. But it's nice to have them on the flanks, and some people argue that the scoring in this list is very, very vulnerable. And in some sense that's true, but the amount of distraction that the rest of the list provides, and juicy targets to my opponents, they are not the main threat to my opponent when I put them on the field, so my opponent also doesn't focus on them, so they usually survive, or survive till the end of the game, or get removed from the game last. Because I haven't really encountered any opponent that was so focused on removing my scoring pieces that he just turn 1 started to blast at my auxiliaries. And also, if he did, I think I would be pretty happy about that. Then we go to special, then we go to the Dark Acolytes. Yeah, these guys, I used to have so the Dread Prince in the list, and then have 2 champions. One with Yema and one with without Yema. And I still saw that that the magic is a bit limited if you only take these 2 units. So probably you could also swing around with 2 units of these with champions and the Wizard Adept, or a Crown of the Wizard King or whatever. But yeah, the Dark Acolytes themselves, they're also light troops. They don't have Vanguard, they don't have Faint Flight, which is often misplayed by Dread Elf players. But oh my god, they back a punch. If you compare them to Dread Knights, for example, the Dark Acolytes, they have an extra attack per piece, they have a 4+ ward save instead of a 2+ armor save, and they have strength 4, obviously, instead of the Cold War Knights, strength 4 with strength 6 on the charge. But yeah, having 2 attacks and also poison on top of that, it's oh my god. You can charge a Stegodon in the flank with these guys and be happy about it, because the end result will be that you'll have a flank, you'll have a charge, you'll have 10 attacks with poison, strength 4 with rerolls of 1s, except for the Yema ones, because they have Yema. And then, yeah, you're probably gonna cause like 2 wounds, maybe 3. That's would be enthusiastic. Probably 2 wounds. And then when the Stegodon strikes back, it doesn't have a thunderstorm, so it just has it's 5 attacks, I think. Hit on 4s, wound on 2s, and you have a ward save of 4+. So yeah, probably it'll do about 1 wound, and that's fine. Because then you'll win combat by quite a margin. You don't have to break his... you actually have to break his stat fast, I think. Because he's still gigantic, yeah. Yeah, that's a bit of a problem. Yeah, but compared to Dread Knights, just breaking stat fast is kind of the same. Because with the Dread Knights you'll also lose a model. So you're not going to be breaking other people's stat fast. And these guys are just so incredibly flexible. I really didn't find a lot of difference between the movement 9 Dark Acolytes and the movement 10 ones with Cult of Yema, because they're both just incredibly swift. The only thing I would have liked is for them to also have Vanguard in the list, because that would be amazing. But otherwise, it's a unit that a lot of people misjudge, because yeah, you don't expect them to hit as hard as they do. Yeah, and they look like fast cav. Also the original models for the Progenitor game of 9th Age had very fast cav like models. Yeah, it's a great unit, and it's one of the damaged pieces in the list. And yeah, it's not gonna clear up big blocks on its own, but for that we have some other choices. So we'll just now continue to the Hunting Chariots. So these pieces, they also proved vital to the list, because the rest of the list, all of the damage output has a maximum strength of strength 5 on the Hydras, and yeah, well, Hydras can go toe to toe with a lot of monsters in the game because of their 4+ regen. Except against flaming ones, or except when you encounter stuff that's like the vampire counts, God of the Damned with a character on it in a unit. You can't get rid of it unless you have Hunting Chariots. A pumped up dragon guy, you can't get rid of it unless you have Hunting Chariots. You can take a chance with the God of Yema guys with Grave Calls turn after turn. But yeah, having the Hunting Chariots in the list, especially as a pair, really makes some matchups very much more easy. So they have movement 9, they have an 18-inch range, so they have an effective range of 27 inches. And with my list being so mobile in general, these, depending on the matchup, these pieces are the pieces that I want to be able to go where they have to go. So the entire list can move around and evade the spaces where these guys have to go. So I'm quite guaranteed to have 2 shots at strength 7 on a 3+ to hit with AP3, multiple wounds, clipped wings, against yeah, the target that I find important in my opponent's army. Yeah, they bring a lot. Yeah, the only downside again is that they don't have feint flight. So if either one of them gets charged, they basically have to flee, because they have, I believe, even toughness 4, 4 wounds, and yeah, the crew is just 2 attacks at strength 3, and the horses are 2 attacks at strength 3. Impacted is just D6 strength 5, so it's really a support piece to chase specific models in the opponent's army. But even if the opponent doesn't have any gigantic stuff, they're still great pieces for taking down stuff like gyrocopters and eagles and all these small chaff redirector pieces. Yeah, and having a pair of them is great, just because it puts up a lot of pressure on your opponent. So what I normally do is that I don't place them as a pair, just like side by side, but I have one on the left side of my opponent's target, one on the right side, so they can't get out of this triangle. And yeah, once you just move up a little bit with one of them and try to lure a charge in, you can make sure that your opponent cannot charge the other one, so that he will always, if he is going to have a failed charge, he's going to have a shot on him the next turn. Yeah, there's been some discussion on whether they are actually worth it, because if they get charged they have to flee and they have to rally and they can't shoot for a turn, and you only have 6 shots in a turn anyway. But it's really a matchup solution. So maybe in a team tournament they're not that necessary, but in a singles tournament they definitely. Okay, so then we go to the last choice in the list, the Hydras. And so this is the real beef of the list. So having 3 Hydras means that, yeah, you're quite matchup dependent, in the sense that if you face Alchemy or Pyromancy, then the matchup is going to be more tough. But on the other hand, Silver Spike still gives you regen, and Quicksilver Lash only wants you on 4+, and Molten Copper is also not too bad. It's just if all of the opponent's units have Flaming Banners, then you're in for trouble, because these guys are the guys that are going to clean up your opponent's big blocks. And yeah, people, I have the feeling that some people misjudge the Hydras, because they compare the Hydras to the Krakens, which, yeah, they are the 2 monster choices in the Dread Elf book. But you could also just then compare a Kraken to a Manticore, because, well, they're also monsters, obviously. I think that the rules between the Krakens and the Hydras are very different. And the Kraken is more of the glass cannon model that has to have a bit of a lucky roll for it to perform well. Or at least when it rolls below average, you're really screwed. And the Hydra just performs on a steady basis, reproducibly, because it has more attacks. It has an additional save, so it doesn't go for the distracting. So if you face some other monster, and for example one of these Ogres and Goblin Spiders, I would much more happily push a Hydra into these guys than a Kraken, because if you put a Kraken in, then you hit about 3 times, you have strength 7, so you wound about 2 times. It's going to be 4 wounds, that's fine. The Spider is going to hit you back. If it hits with its poison attack, then yeah, your Kraken is screwed, because then it's going to get a couple of wounds. And then for the rest of the attacks, there's just coming a lot of attacks out of one of these spiders, and yeah, they will get like 2 or 3 wounds through, and then the next turn it's a bit of a 50-50 whether you would kill a spider or not. Whilst with a Hydra you can go in, and usually enemy armies have just a couple of pieces that are really interesting to go crazy on. So for example at Gargantula I would use my breath weapon. So you have 7 attacks, strength 5, you have a breath weapon that does also summer wounds. So basically in terms of damage output you would probably do about the same as a Kraken. And then afterwards you have a 4+ regen instead of distracting, which I think is so much better. Yeah, because, well, yeah, with the Kraken you go from either 3+ to hit against it to a 4+, or from a 4+ to a 5+. So that's a reduction of about 1/3 of the hits if you go from 4+ to 5+. With the Hydra you halve the amount of wounds that the opponent does, so that's, yeah, I would say it's better. Yeah, and having 3 of those really complements the list, because in the end, if you look into the entire list, I don't have any single piece that cannot move at least 9 inches to any direction, except for the crossbows, but yeah, they're not going to be in the front line, they're just going to take some pot shots when they get the chance, but they're not going to participate in the battle in a very aggressive way. So that's the main power of the list. Once your opponent doesn't have a lot of ranged output, because, well, ranged output is fine as long as it's not mobile. So for example, against Empire, I happily play this list against Empire, because usually with the terrain setup you're able to hide your important pieces from one of the 2 cannons, or just the 1 cannon that the Empire player has. And otherwise the shooting that the Empire player will bring, it's going to be handgunners, crossbowmen, maybe Hydras, or, well, the Hydras you can easily remove with your Dark Riders, and then yeah, the handgunners and the crossbowmen, unless your opponent puts them really on the side of the table facing inwards with crossbowmen, because they have a sufficient range and the handgunners don't, you can easily just go out of their arcs. And even if your opponent decides to just put them on the flanks, you can either go for the middle of the board, or you can go just rampage over one of the flanks and then focus fire. Yeah, so tough matchups include Vermin Swarm. Otherwise problems include yeah, just any mobile range platform like Ogre Lead Belches or Ogre, yeah, the guys with cannons. They are inconvenient. Pyromancy mages are well, to any elven army, very inconvenient. But yeah, there's a lot of matchups where this army can actually do really well. So for those of you who... Then to round up this video, I'll give you a bit of an example of how this army would play in the first couple of turns. So I just put it on board against my Empire of Sun style army that you've seen in a couple of other videos. So this is just to demonstrate to you guys how this army would play. So for deployment, I made the Dread Elf army just drop everything first. This is because the first turn for this army is quite important, because if the enemy deploys in such a way that there's still any gap in its deployment, then you can just push through a unit of Dark Riders and put some pressure on already early on. Yeah, so this Empire army is, yeah, it can be a bit of a inconvenient matchup, but on the other hand, it's, yeah, still quite static. Yeah, you can't really protect your lines from stuff that acts from such a big range away. So yeah, you can see that even when I deployed against myself, maybe also a bit intentionally, but just one unit of Dark Riders already manages to go in between the Knights of the Sun Griffin and the unit of Hydras, and then there's the 2 units on the right flank that can also still get outside of the Empire's line of sight. The rest of the army gets to move up just a little bit, and then there's 2 hunting chariots that can put pressure on the bigger single model pieces in my opponent's army. And the Hydras here, they are the real combat threats against infantry, and actually against monsters they can dish out some damage, but I find the Dark Acolytes to be more effective at handling monsters because of the poison, and also because of the 4+ Aegis save and being immune to stomps. Most monsters have about 5 or 6 attacks, and then storms and other kinds of threatening stuff. But with the defensive skill of 4, most monsters hit these guys on 4s, then you have the 4+ Aegis, so in the end only a quarter of the attacks get to become wounds, so that's about 1 wound, and then I do 1 wound back at least. Yeah, after charges and everything, I might just win combat and even grind down my opponent over time. So as you can see, I'm currently not rolling any dice, I'm just gauging on my expectations and giving both sides a little bit of luck here and there, just to make it a very quick playthrough really. So for example, the Empire, I gave a bit of luck by being able to just shoot down the hunting chariot in one go in the shooting phase. So this could be achieved by the combined efforts of the steam tank, of the mortar, of the unit of riders. So you can see that with the Empire list, yeah, you could have pushed through, but yeah, the real issue is that you don't really have anything that you achieve by pushing through on any single point against this army, because the army unfolds anyway around you, and if you do so. It's also a bit of a tough choice, because you have to have the shooting output in units that can respond to the Dark Riders' agile movements. So they have to be flexible enough to basically shoot anywhere where the Dark Riders can hide, whilst not allowing the Dark Riders to shoot at anything else in your army. So once again, stuff like Vermin Swarm is a bit irritating, and Ogolette Belches. Sylvan Elves are usually not that bad because they are very squishy themselves. So if you get first turn, you can move up and just put pressure on. And the Hydras, they have the breath weapons with strength 4. If they get close to any Sylvan Elven unit, then it's gonna burn. So this army allows you to get the matchups where you want them at the time you want them. And you set the pace for the game basically. So and yeah, the Empire list can still remove some pieces from the game. It can still charge here and there. If it charges Dark Riders, then most likely they'll just flee and rally again. But the Empire list can't really evade the Hydras all too much. And then there's still the hunting chariots that threat the big single models. So it's a very interesting list to play because it plays so much different than most of the 9th Age lists. Because what my vision in this army is that it doesn't really have a center. So that's also why there's no Dread Knights in the army, because the lateral movement of them is just too low. So they cannot get us out of situations basically. So the Hydras being with their 6-inch advance being the slowest advancing unit, besides the crossbowmen that are just there to provide the scoring at the end of the game. The Hydras are the slowest, but if they can march they can still go 12 inches. So then it would be the hunting chariots, but the hunting chariots are there to just control, just to zone control basically the elements of my opponent's army that I don't want to be left out freely in the field. And yeah, I think it's a very nice army in the sense that it has a lot of power where you might not expect it. Anyway, that's it for now. I hope you liked this video, and I'll see you the next time.